Paul McCartney and John Lennon's famed relationship was not without its disagreements. It was common practice for the two to write music together at Paul's childhood home in Allerton, on Forthlin Road, during the early days of the Beatles. Yet, their creative differences grew increasingly clear over time, particularly in the second half of the 1960s. As a result, they would frequently compose the song's basic elements alone, before passing them on to each other for final polishing. During the recordings for Let It Be and the White Album, band tensions rose considerably. During these times, the band was riven by arguments, and George Harrison and Ringo Starr almost had a breakup. Above all, John was unhappy with Paul's subsequent work. He panned Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the 1967 album, the song Let It Be, and even the concluding medley on Abbey Road, calling it junk. Even though John wasn't happy with the CDs as a whole, he was unhappy with individual songs like Oh, Darling. Though he did most of the songwriting, Paul chose to sing lead. Originally planned for the Get Back recordings in April 1969, the band had trouble with the background vocals and came back to it in August 1969 when Abbey Road was almost finished. Nothing would sway Paul from his will to succeed. Afterwards, he recalled that for a week he would get up early every day and get to the studio in the hopes of getting the live, unprocessed sound he had in mind for the song. When he sang, he aimed for the raspy, worn-out sound of a musician who had been honing their craft for days. To get the real live vibe, he sang it to a backing track that was played via the speakers. Noted sound engineer Alan Parsons reflected on Paul's commitment. Every day he would arrive, do the vocal, and then decide it wasn't adequate. From then, Paul would take a break and come back to the studio the next day, repeating the procedure until he was satisfied. It seems like Paul was going for a certain rawness in the vocal, which could only be attained by singing it once a day before his voice altered, according to Parsons. During this time, Paul made a joke about how difficult it would have been to record the vocal 5 years ago, bringing up the days of Long Tall Sally in Kansas City. With all of Paul's hard work, John still wasn't satisfied with Oh, Darling. He thought he could have sang the song more convincingly than Paul, as it was more ear-catching and expressive. John said in an interview with Playboy from 1980 that he ever felt he could have done a better job performing the song than Paul, as it was more his style.